Alina had known Arav for years. They worked in the same office, sat just a few desks apart, and crossed paths almost every day. He was the kind of person everyone seemed to gravitate toward, charming without trying, effortlessly funny, with a smile that could brighten even the dullest Monday morning. But to him, she was just a colleague, a friend at best. To her, he was everything. Her feelings weren't loud or dramatic, they were quiet, steady, like the slow bloom of a flower in the shade. She carried them like a secret treasure, tucked deep inside where no one could see, because some emotions were too delicate to be spoken aloud. She watched him from afar, memorizing the little things, the way he tapped his pen against the desk when he was thinking, the way he leaned back in his chair during meetings, eyes half narrowed in focus, the way his voice softened when he was explaining something to the new interns. It wasn't infatuation born of fleeting attraction, it was a deep, unshakable admiration. She had seen him at his best, sealing deals, earning applause from clients, and at his worst, when a project failed and he quietly stayed back after hours to fix the mess without blaming anyone else. Their conversations were always light, never personal enough to give her heart the opening it craved. Sometimes he'd stop by her desk just to ask if she had had lunch or to share a ridiculous meme on his phone. She'd laugh, hiding the way her pulse quickened. He'd walk away, never noticing how her gaze followed him long after he disappeared around the corner. In the break room, she'd catch herself glancing at the clock, timing her coffee breaks to coincide with his. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but when it did, those few stolen minutes felt like small victories, moments she could replay in her mind later when she was alone. Arav, on the other hand, seemed blissfully unaware. He treated her with the same warmth he offered everyone. There was never a hint in his tone, never a flicker in his eyes to suggest he saw her as anything more than another friendly face in the office. And that was both a comfort and a heartbreak. Because maybe, if he never noticed, her heart would be safe. But then again, what was the point of loving someone if they never knew? Still, Alina couldn't bring herself to risk it. She had seen too many office friendships sour after confessions went wrong. She valued his easy banter, the casual way they could talk about anything from weekend plans to the best food stalls in the city. She didn't want to lose that. One rainy afternoon, as the sound of water pattering against the windows filled the office, Arav leaned over her desk with a half-smile. "Looks like we're stuck here until the rain lets up," he said, glancing outside. She smiled back, pretending her heart wasn't skipping beats. "Guess so. Want to grab a cup of tea? My treat." It was nothing, just tea, just two colleagues taking a break together. But as they sat in the corner of the cafeteria, steam curling from their cups, she allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, that it was something more, that maybe someday he'd look at her differently, that someday her quiet beginning would turn into something neither of them had expected. For now, she was content to sit across from him, sipping tea, memorizing the curve of his smile. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive in a rush. Sometimes it slips in quietly, unnoticed, until it's been there all along. For Alina, love wasn't a grand performance. It was hidden in the rhythm of ordinary days. It was in the way she memorized Arav's schedule without meaning to, how she knew exactly when he'd step away from his desk for a call, or when he'd return from a client meeting looking tired and in need of a quiet moment. She became fluent in the language of his habits, reading him like a well-worn book only she had taken the time to study. Every morning, she arrived a few minutes earlier than necessary. She'd stop by the cafe down the street, ordering her usual tea and his favorite coffee, strong and just a touch sweet. She never made it obvious that it was for him. She would simply set it on his desk with a casual, "Thought you might need this," as if it were nothing. Arav would smile in thanks, take a sip, and get back to work. He never asked how she always got it exactly right. He didn't need to. Sometimes she covered for him in meetings when she noticed his mind drifting elsewhere. If he fumbled for the right words or seemed too preoccupied to respond, Alina would speak up, filling in the blanks without hesitation. To the rest of the team, it looked like simple teamwork. To her, it was something more. A way of quietly protecting him, of making sure he was never left exposed. He never remarked on it, but once she caught him glancing at her with a curious expression, as if he just realized how often she was there to steady him. She wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, he noticed. But most days it seemed like her presence was background noise in his world. Arav was kind, friendly, and often engaged in conversations with everyone in the office, but he didn't linger with her the way she wished he would. They'd exchange small talk about deadlines, clients, or the weather, and then he turned to someone else with that warm smile she adored. Alina told herself she was fine with this. She had grown used to loving him quietly, in the spaces between words, and in the gestures he'd never traced back to her heart. It was safer this way. If he never knew, she could never lose him. And yet, there were moments she let herself imagine. Sometimes during the slow afternoons when the hum of the office faded into a comfortable stillness, she'd picture him leaning across her desk with that same smile, only softer, meant just for her. She'd imagined him saying her name the way she longed to hear it, or telling her that he had noticed all along. In those daydreams, his hand would find hers, warm and certain, and she'd realize she didn't have to hide anymore. But reality always broke through. A phone would ring, someone would call his name, and just like that, the vision would fade, replaced by the familiar sight of him walking past her desk without knowing that her whole world had turned to watch him. She reminded herself that not every love story had to be spoken aloud. Some existed quietly, like a song hummed under the breath, beautiful but unheard. Hers was like that. Still, there were nights when she'd sit at home replaying every moment they had shared, however small. A laugh over an inside joke, a smile in the hallway, the brush of his arm when they both reached for the same file. Little things that didn't mean much to anyone else, but meant everything to her. Alina didn't know if her quiet devotion would ever be seen for what it was. But she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't ready to stop loving him, even if it was only from a distance. Romantic. The rain had started without warning, turning the city's evening bustle into a blur of umbrellas and hurried footsteps. Alina stood at the office entrance, clutching her bag, watching the sheets of water fall. She didn't mind the rain. In fact, she loved it. But the thought of walking to the bus stop in heels, balancing files and her handbag, made her hesitate. She was still debating whether to wait it out when a voice came from beside her. "Heading to the bus stop?" Arav asked, his own jacket already slung over his arm. She turned, slightly startled. "Yeah, just waiting for it to slow down a bit. I'll walk you," he said simply, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Alina opened her mouth to protest. She didn't want to inconvenience him, but the words caught in her throat. She nodded instead, and they stepped out together into the cool, damp evening. Arav held his umbrella over both of them, angling it slightly more toward her side. The scent of rain mixed with the faint cologne he always wore, a smell she knew far too well from passing him in the office hallway. They started with the usual, light talk about work deadlines, the next client meeting, but as they reached the quieter streets, the conversation shifted. It happened so seamlessly that Alina almost didn't notice at first. He asked her about her childhood, where she grew up, what her home was like. She told him about the small town she'd lived in, about her father's love for gardening, and how her mother always hummed the same tune while cooking. In return, he spoke about his own family, his sister who lived abroad, and how he used to get into trouble for sneaking into the kitchen late at night for extra dessert. It wasn't the kind of conversation they had at work. There was no rush, no pretense, just two people walking through the rain, sharing pieces of themselves they didn't often reveal. Somewhere along the way, they began talking about dreams. Arav admitted he wanted to start his own business someday, something small but meaningful. Elena found herself telling him about her love for writing, something she'd never mentioned to anyone in the office. He listened intently, asking questions and encouraging her in a way that made her feel seen. They paused at a traffic light, the glow of red reflecting off the wet pavement. Arav glanced at her then, not the quick, casual look of a colleague, but something steadier. His eyes softened, and for a second she felt the air between them shift. "You should write," he said quietly. "You'd probably be really good at it." Her chest tightened. No one had ever told her that before. Not like this, not with such certainty. The rest of the walk felt different. Even when they returned to lighter topics, joking about how terrible office coffee was, there was an undercurrent of something warmer, something unspoken. When they reached her bus stop, she found herself wishing the walk had been longer. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the street lamps cast a golden haze around them. "Thanks for walking me," she said, tucking a strand of damp hair behind her ear. "Anytime," he replied, and for a moment it felt like he meant it in more ways than one. The bus pulled up, and she stepped inside, taking a seat by the window. As the vehicle began to move, she looked back. Arav was still there, hands in his pockets, watching the bus until it turned the corner. Elena leaned against the glass, her heart strangely light. She had spent years guarding her feelings, keeping them tucked away where they couldn't be hurt. But tonight, in the space between raindrops and laughter, she felt something she hadn't dared to feel in a long time: hope. And though she didn't know what it meant yet, she knew the air between them had changed. The announcement of the team trip to the mountains was met with a chorus of cheers and murmurs around the office. Some saw it as a welcome break from routine, others as a chance to bond outside the confines of cubicles in conference rooms. For Elena, it was both exciting and nerve-wracking. The idea of spending 2 whole days away from the office, and possibly spending that time around Arav, sent her heart into a quiet frenzy she tried hard to conceal. The day of the trip arrived crisp and clear. The bus wound its way through twisting roads, past valleys that stretched endlessly, painted with shades of green she'd almost forgotten existed. Arav sat a few seats ahead, laughing with a group of colleagues, his voice carrying over the rumble of the engine. Elena sat by the window, pretending to read the messages on her phone, but stealing glances at him whenever she thought no one was looking. By the time they reached the foothills, the air was cooler, scented with pine and damp earth. The team split into groups for the planned hike, and fate, or perhaps sheer coincidence, placed Arav and Elena together. He smiled when he saw her name next to his on the list, and she returned it, her own smile betraying more than she intended. The trail wound upward through dense forest, sunlight breaking through the canopy in soft, golden beams. Their steps fell into an easy rhythm, neither too fast nor too slow, and the silence between them was comfortable rather than awkward. They spoke occasionally about the view, about the office gossip that seemed miles away now, but mostly they just walked, listening to the crunch of leaves beneath their shoes and the distant call of birds. Halfway up the trail, the ground became uneven, scattered with rocks slick from the previous night's rain. Elena's foot caught on one, and she stumbled forward with a gasp. Before she could fall, Arav's hand shot out, gripping her arm firmly. The force of the catch pulled her slightly against him, and for a brief, suspended moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. The warmth of his hand through her jacket, the faint scent of his cologne, and the quickened pace of her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low, his eyes searching hers. She nodded, breathless for reasons that had little to do with the stumble. Yeah, I'm fine. Thanks. But his hand didn't drop immediately. It lingered, his thumb brushing her sleeve almost absent-mindedly before he finally let go. In that fleeting contact, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement, a shift, a spark. Alina wasn't sure if she imagined it, but the weight of that moment settled deep in her chest. They continued walking, the air between them subtly changed. He seemed more attentive now, slowing his pace to match hers, pointing out views he thought she'd like, occasionally glancing her way as if to check she was still doing okay. And every time their eyes met, there was that same quiet pull, like an invisible thread tightening. When they reached a small clearing overlooking the valley, they paused to take it in. The mountains rolled into the horizon, the sunlight painting them in gold and shadow. Arav stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost brushed. "It's beautiful," she whispered, though she wasn't sure she was talking about the view anymore. "Yeah," he replied, his gaze not fixed on the valley, but on her profile. She didn't see it, the way his eyes softened, the way his smile faded into something quieter, more thoughtful. But she felt it, like the warmth of sunlight on skin, subtle yet undeniable. The hike ended as the sun began to sink, casting long shadows across the path. Back at the lodge, laughter and chatter filled the air. But Alina's mind was still somewhere on that trail, on the moment she almost fell, and on the hands that had caught her, steady and sure. Something had shifted that day. It wasn't love yet, not in the way she dreamed, but it was something. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, fate was quietly taking her side. Romantic. The fire crackled softly, sending sparks spiraling into the dark mountain sky. Around the circle, laughter mingled with the strum of someone's guitar. But for Alina, the world had narrowed to the warmth of the man sitting beside her. Arav's shoulder brushed against hers every so often, a barely there contact that felt like the only thing keeping her grounded. The night smelled of pine and wood smoke, and the stars were scattered across the sky like diamonds flung by careless hands. She tried to focus on the conversations happening around them, stories from childhood, jokes about office mishaps, plans for tomorrow's hike, but her mind kept drifting back to the man beside her. The glow of the fire cast his profile in gold, highlighting the quiet strength in his features, the way his eyes softened when he listened. She hadn't planned to say anything. Not here. Not now. For years she had kept her feelings folded neatly inside, like a letter never sent. It was safer that way. But the warmth of the fire, the nearness of him, the rhythm of his breathing, it all loosened something in her, like a knot finally giving way. Arav shifted slightly, turning toward her as someone on the other side of the fire cracked the joke. His eyes met hers for the briefest moment, and in that look, she saw all the reasons she had fallen in love with him. His patience, his quiet confidence, the way he made her feel seen without saying a word. And then, before she could stop herself, the words escaped, barely a whisper, almost carried away by the mountain breeze. "You have no idea how long I've loved you." The moment the words left her lips, panic surged. Her breath caught and she wanted to gather them back, tuck them safely away like she always had. She hadn't meant to speak them aloud. Not like this. Not surrounded by colleagues, not under a sky that seemed to be listening. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks upward. Around them, the chatter continued, oblivious. But between the two of them, the air shifted. Arav didn't speak immediately. He just looked at her, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. She could feel her pulse hammering in her ears, every second stretching into an eternity. Had she ruined everything? Would tomorrow bring polite avoidance, awkward silences, the slow erosion of what they had? Her fingers curled into her lap, nails biting into her palms. She forced herself to look away, pretending to be interested in the way the embers glowed at the edge of the fire. Then, slowly, his hand moved. It wasn't rushed, wasn't hesitant. It was deliberate. His fingers brushed against hers, lingering before curling gently around them. The warmth of his touch spread through her like sunlight after a long winter. When she looked up, his eyes were still on her. There was no shock there, no discomfort. Instead, there was a quiet depth, as if he had been turning over his own unspoken thoughts, and had just found the courage to let them breathe. "I think," he said softly, "I'm starting to understand." It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't the sweeping romance she had imagined in her quiet daydreams. But it was real. And in that moment, real was more than enough. They stayed like that, hands intertwined, saying nothing else. The fire burned lower, the guitar grew quiet, and the mountain air wrapped around them like a secret. For the first time in years, Alina didn't have to imagine what it might feel like if he cared. She could feel it, warm and certain, in the space between their joined hands. The fire crackled softly, sending glowing embers up into the night. Shadows danced across Aurov's face, highlighting the tenderness in his eyes. Alina's hand was still in his, warm and steady, though her heart was racing wildly in her chest. She could hear the faint chatter of their teammates in the background, but it all felt distant, as though the world had faded away, leaving only the two of them in the glow of the flames. "Alina," he said softly, his voice almost blending with the wind. "I've always noticed." He paused, his eyes dropping to their intertwined fingers, as if the words were too heavy to release all at once. "I just didn't think I deserved it." Her brows furrowed. "Deserved what?" she asked, though part of her already knew. He took a deep breath, his shoulders rising and falling as though he were exhaling years of unspoken truths. "Your love," he admitted finally. "Your attention. You've always been so kind, so genuine. And I—" He hesitated, glancing away toward the darkness beyond the firelight. "I'm not sure I've been the kind of man who could give you what you deserve." Alina blinked, his words sinking into her like drops of rain into parched earth. "Why would you think that?" she whispered. He gave a faint, self-deprecating smile. "Because I've been afraid. Afraid of failing you. Afraid that if I let you in and it didn't work, I'd lose not just a friend, but one of the few people in my life who truly sees me." The way he said it, that raw, unguarded tone, sent a tremor through her. She had always admired Arav's calm, his easy confidence, but now she saw the fragility beneath it, and it made him love him even more. "Arav," she murmured, "do you have any idea how many times I stopped myself from telling you how I felt? I thought you didn't see me that way." His eyes met hers again, and she saw it, the truth shimmering in the reflection of the fire. "He did," he said simply. "From the very beginning. Every little thing about you. The way you bite your lip when you're thinking, how you always bring tea for everyone in the office without being asked, the way your laugh makes everything feel lighter. I noticed it all. I just—" He broke off with a small, helpless shrug. I thought keeping my feelings quiet was safer than risking losing you. The confession was like a mirror to her own fears. She could feel the weight of all the wasted moments between them, all the near confessions swallowed back in favor of polite small talk. All this time, they had been two people orbiting the same truth, each too afraid to close the distance. "You've been loving me in silence," she said, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Just like I've been loving you." Something softened in his face, and for the first time that night, he allowed himself a real smile. Not the polite, measured one she saw at work, but the kind that lit up his entire being. "Looks like we've both been fools," he murmured. They sat there for a while longer, neither speaking, their fingers still linked as if to make up for all the time they had spent apart in spirit. The fire crackled, the stars burned bright above them, and the air between them was no longer heavy with unsaid things. It was lighter now, alive with the promise of something real. Alina knew that tomorrow the world would return with its usual chaos, the emails, the deadlines, the polite exchanges in the office. But tonight, under the quiet watch of the mountains, they had crossed a line that neither of them would ever want to retreat from. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid. And by the way Aurov's thumb traced gentle circles against her hand, she knew he wasn't either. Back in the city, the rhythm of life resumed. Deadlines, meetings, the endless buzz of people moving from one place to another. Yet for Alina, everything felt different now. The streets seemed brighter, the air lighter, as though someone had quietly tilted the world and given it a softer hue. Even in the office, the change was impossible to ignore. Their glances stretched longer, lingering as though each look was an unspoken promise. Their smiles carried a warmth that had not been there before, and in those moments, no one else existed. Sometimes, during meetings, she'd catch him watching her, his gaze steady and full of something she couldn't quite put into words. She'd pretend to look away, but her heart would race, betraying her composure. And yet, nothing had been said out loud since the night by the bonfire. The words still floated between them like a fragile glass bubble, ready to be caught or left drifting. It was a Thursday evening when it happened. The sky outside her apartment window was painted in shades of gold and lavender, the city lights beginning to twinkle in the distance. Alina was curled up on the couch, a half-read book resting in her lap, when there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find Arav standing there, his expression caught somewhere between nervous and certain. In his hands was a bouquet of fresh lilies, their petals delicate and fragrant. "For you," he said a little softer than usual, as if he were afraid the moment might shatter if he spoke too loudly. Her heart tightened. "They're beautiful." He smiled faintly, but there was something in his eyes, a determination, a decision finally made. He stepped closer, the flowers still in his hand, and said, "No more secrets, Alina." She froze. The words seemed to wrap around her, pulling her in, unraveling every thread of hesitation she had left. Before she could respond, he placed the bouquet gently on the small cable beside the door and cupped her face in his hands. The kiss was not hurried, not hesitant. It was the kind that carried years of quiet longing, all the missed chances and unsent words folded into one perfect moment. The noise of the city, the faint hum of traffic, even the ticking of the clock, all of it faded until there was nothing but the warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart against hers. When they finally pulled back, their foreheads rested together, breaths mingling in the small space between them. She could feel his hands trembling slightly and realized her own were no steadier. "You have no idea how long I've wanted to do that." Her eyes stung with unshed tears, but she smiled. "I think I do." They stood there for a moment longer, letting the silence say everything it needed to. Then, with a small laugh that felt like the release of years of tension, She took his hand and led him inside. The evening unfolded in a way that felt both ordinary and extraordinary. 2 mugs of tea on the counter, the faint melody of music in the background, their conversations soft but filled with an unspoken joy. The years of longing, of pretending their feelings didn't exist, had melted away. In their place was something new, fragile, yes, but real and full of promise. Alina realized that love didn't always arrive with fireworks or dramatic declarations. Sometimes it was built quietly, in stolen glances, in the way someone remembered how you liked your coffee, in the patience of waiting until the moment was right. That night, as they stood by her window watching the city lights shimmer, she felt his fingers intertwine with hers. It wasn't just a gesture, it was a vow. And she knew, without a doubt, that they had finally found the courage to speak the truth they had both been carrying all along.